My name is Margie McDonald. I'm with the Montana Association of Churches, and if you had been reading the letters column in any major daily newspaper in this state, it might surprise you to know that a significant Christian community in Montana has participated actively and been happy to be involved in putting together a track at this conference. And our next speaker will be developing theme that I think is very important to the consideration of some of the issues that we are dealing with here today. Let me just explain who the Montana Association of Churches is. It is a group of 8 Protestant and Roman Catholic denominations in Montana, spanning the spectrum. We have American Baptist, Episcopal, Disciples of Christ, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, United Methodist Church, United Church of Christ, Presbyterian, hate to think I'm forgetting somebody, and Roman Catholic, which I said earlier, and Episcopal. I didn't say that already. The denominations that are involved in Montana Association of Churches have in their membership 250,000 Montanans. It is a significant number of folks. I guess I would like to start out by introducing our speaker and our respondents, and then they will have the opportunity to jump up and speak. And I think we're hoping to have some opportunity for Dr. Capps to respond to you all with some thoughts and questions and ideas as well. And hopefully be able to wrap this up by around 2:45 so that Chris can direct us to our next points of call, I guess. And so with that, I would like to say that Dr. Capps comes to us today from Santa Barbara, where I happen to know is probably just as sunny as it is here in Montana. A few days ago in Billings, I would have thought that he really was coming into it, but he actually hit some beautiful October weather. And we are happy to welcome he and his wife to Montana, where Lois Capps is a native of Kalispell, so they know what a wonderful place we have here, even though they also share one of God's great places. Dr. Capps teaches religious studies and has, I understand, for 29 years at the University of California at Santa Barbara. He chairs the Department of Religious Studies there. He is also an active and involved member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and he has spent a considerable part of his career trying to come to an understanding of the new Christian right over the last, I guess I would say 16 years as it has emerged and evolved, and brings to us some real understanding and perspective on that. He has written a book on the new Christian, on the Christian right called The Christian Right, and he has met with and visited with a number of the leaders of that community, and has some perspectives, I think, that are tremendously helpful and valuable to all of us as we come to terms with the emergence of this movement in American life today. Responding to Dr. Capps will be Reverend Lynn Hodges, who is currently serving a church, United Church of Christ Pilgrim Church in Billings, Montana, as an interim pastor. Lynn Hodges is one of these people who I've just found to be a great resource, and I'm very happy that he and his wife Clara are here in Montana. Lynn was one of the pastors in San Francisco when a young man named Martin Luther King Jr. was coming out to talk about civil rights, and helped to arrange for the visit of that young civil rights spokesperson at that time in history. He was involved in civic life in Tacoma when the John Birch Society took over the city council of the city of Tacoma, and again was involved in helping the community strike a balance and come to terms with that whole movement. And I'm happy to have Lynn here. He is an American Baptist, and he will be sharing with you his perspective as an evangelical Christian on some of these ideas. And also today we have Reverend Jessica Christ. Jessica's got the job that I think is one of the most wonderful and must be fun jobs in this state, and that is that she coordinates, she's the director of the Northern Rockies Institute of Theology. And in her role as such, she brings to Montana some of the most interesting and cutting-edge theological thinkers in Christianity today. And this is a Lutheran study group, so a lot of these theologians are Lutheran, but they would be of interest to anyone who is deeply immersed and interested in Christian thought. Jessica comes to Montana with an education in the Ivy League, I would say. She got her undergraduate degree from Yale and did her graduate work at Harvard. And she brings great gifts to Montana. And like me, she is a part-time professional person and a full-time professional parent. And so we have a lot in common on that ground. So would you please welcome Dr. Capps.
Well, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm glad that it was mentioned that while we do come from California, that we do have some Montana ties, because I've run into a little bit of static on this. I'm coming from the state of California, but I've been here several days now, and I've been pointing out that I'm originally from the state of Nebraska, which doesn't mean a whole lot, except that I mean, it means an awful lot to me, really, but it means that I belong to a group. I've done this voluntarily. I belong to a group called the Slow Talkers. You know, the Slow Talkers of America. Some of you may be members of that group. It doesn't set me up well for a talk on a Saturday afternoon right after lunch, doing the Slow Talkers, especially when we have such able panelists who are, as we have today. So I'm going to talk a little more rapidly. But I must say that when we left Nebraska, when I was growing up, my father said, if you learn 200 words, that's all you'll need, just 200 good ones, and you have to use them carefully. But don't get yourself in a position where you have to talk too long, because he said you have to repeat them over and over. And he said if you get into a spot like that, where like you have, I'm taking too much time even telling you this stuff, but you get into a situation like that where you have to go on for a little while, he said, practice the habit of looking down at your shoes from time to time when you get stumped. And he said it'll happen like magic. You look at your shoes and somebody will say something or do something and it'll get you through and you get on to the next point. Well, here I am, a slow talker, talking about things that are not easy to talk about, but I want to talk about the use of the word Christian, and I'll give you the thesis at the outset. And the thesis is that it has to be a term that is used in an inclusive sense and not in an exclusive sense. See, I've done it there. I mean, it took a minute to say that, and that's my thesis. That the word Christian ought to be inclusive and not exclusive. And then I'd like to add a P.S. here about the conference theme on diversity. It goes like this, that several years ago, I had the privilege of being invited to a breakfast with former President Jimmy Carter. And he had come to Santa Barbara, I think, on it doesn't matter why he came, right? It does matter. It matters a whole lot, but I don't have time to get into that. But there he was. We were standing out there on the patio after breakfast, and I had read his book, Keeping the Faith, and I had the book there ready for him to autograph, which he did. And then I said, not only did I have the book, but I'd read the book. It's like the line that we used earlier about infant baptism. Somebody was asked if he believed in infant baptism. I said, no, does he believe in it? He says he's seen it. I said it seemed to me that the high point of the story that he told in Keeping the Faith, was the Camp David meeting, the peace accords between himself and Mr. Begin and Mr. Sadat. And he said it was. That is true. That was the high point of the presidency. And then he said, you being in the field of religious studies, and I have to say I was introduced to him that way. I don't think you can sort of read that off the way I look, although it's possible. He said, you will appreciate then that we set up that Camp David meeting as a kind of religious retreat. And he said that he was aware of the fact that a religious tradition meant a great deal to all three of the participants. That Mr. Begin is a Jew, Mr. Sadat is a Muslim, and he is a Christian. And he thought that if they could tap the resourcefulness of those three traditions, their inclination toward peace, that would accelerate and encourage the peace process. He said it was true. It turned out that way. The problem, he said, was that that they didn't program was that Mr. Sadat was occupied on Friday, Mr. Begin was occupied on Saturday. Those are holy days for the two of them. And he said he had to take a few hours. There's the Protestant position. A few hours on Sunday. But he said between Monday and Thursday they were able to get quite a bit of work done. Now why do I tell that story here today? The reason is, sometimes I have to answer this question rhetorically. I just don't know why. But no, I do know. It's an interesting story, but it was what happened after that got me into the theme for this talk. And that he said that when he was a boy, his mother taught him that religion stands for good things. I said good things like, he said good things like tolerance, brotherhood, peace, and compassion. Those are the four. I know that because I wrote them down right afterwards. And then he said that he would like to believe that his mother was telling him the truth, but he discovered after 4 years in the White House that religion stands for the opposite of those as well, the very opposite of those. The opposite of compassion, the opposite of tolerance, the opposite of brotherhood and sisterhood, the opposite of peace. Now, if you'd gone into the other words, you'd say intolerance, zealotry, all the kinds of things that gives religion its bad name. And as a professor of religious studies, who within the University of California, which like all universities strives for objectivity in the field of everything we study, that pains me deeply, because I would like to think that religion stands for good things. I would like to think that religion is there primarily to edify, but I'm also aware of the fact that some of the worst crimes against humanity have been done in the name of religion. Some of the worst things that are happening in our society today are done with the kind of religious blessing or religious sponsorship. A whole lot of religion, in my view, is simply pathology. I don't like to admit that. I wish it weren't that way, but it seems to me that way. A great book that came out early in this century was William James' book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. And he talked about religion as having a very close connection to what he said on the one hand was healthy-mindedness, on the other side was sick soul. And it can go both ways. And I'm not labeling. I'm not labeling groups that way today, because that's part of what I would wish we had a way to overcome. But I spent some time at the when I was writing my book. The book, by the way, has now become a bestseller. I think they printed up about 20 copies, and my wife has a number of Norwegian relatives, and we've given this away at Christmas time, and I think we still have a box out in the garage. But when I was working on the book, I went into Pat Robertson's place, CBN University, and I was there about 4 days and listened to some lectures and went to chapel and various things. And when I was ready to leave, I came in and to thank the dean who had been my host. And this is a longer story that I'm going to have to tell very, very quickly. But the room started filling up with people, and the dean was occupied on a long-distance phone call. And after the room was full of people, the dean came out and asked and gave a signal to a woman who was sitting at her typewriter, who spun around at that point and called me Walter, which is my name. Walter, do you call yourself a Christian? She said. And I said, I have no problem with that. Now, when I told that story at home, my children, they're not children anymore, but they said, you didn't answer it, Dad. But that was the answer. I have no problem with that. She said, have you had a born-again experience? And I said, I'm going to have to answer that the same way Ronald Reagan answered that. This was in the 1980s, when you folks asked him. This wasn't being smart alecky or anything. He just said, I didn't need that, he said, because my mother got it right the first time. Now, what I think what he meant was that he'd been raised in that kind of a family. So I answered that way, and what happened here didn't happen there. Then the next question was, are you filled with the Spirit? And I said, it's so hard to tell when you go flying around going through jet lag and stuff. It's, have you spoken in tongues? And I said, no, not really. I thought of my dad and the 200 words, and I'm still trying to learn the English language. And then she said, would you like to speak in tongues? And somehow the word lust occurred to me. And I thought, I've never lusted after that. I mean, there's some other things that I don't want to talk about lust today, Saturday afternoon, but usually on a Saturday afternoon what I lust for is a hot dog. I allow myself to have one of those a week. But anyway, I said, no, I've never wanted to do that. Never felt the need to do that. She said, have you ever heard it? I said, I don't think so. Would you like to hear it? I don't know. I said, if I say yes, can you do it? She said, I can do it. Jerry can do it. All these people can do it. So I said, well, it seems to me that that's sort of to put yourself on exhibit here. I mean, you can do things I can't do. And she said, no, we wouldn't do it as an exhibit. She said we'd have to do it in attitude of prayer. Then she said, would you pray with us? Well, folks, I'd had it because it's either yes or no. And I said, sure. I was actually thinking of Lutheran prayer, which, with all due respect to my Lutheran friends, doesn't require an awful lot. I mean, you can you can look at your shoes during that period. You can check in and out a little bit. But this was real. I mean, this was standing in a circle, holding hands and having hands go up and down like this, and speaking in tongues. And I thought, first thing I'm going to do here is time this, because it'll be interesting to me to see how long this goes on. It went on 21 minutes. But then along the way I thought, why don't I just, who knows who's right here? I mean, if John Hick is telling the truth that speak up a little bit? Okay. Is that better? If John Hick is telling the truth that maybe I'll just hold it up like this. How's that? Is that a little better? Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't know you couldn't hear. It seemed like I was getting such fine response there. Okay. Anyway, let's get through this story. And nothing at all happened. I didn't speak in tongues. Nothing at all happened. And afterwards, I got a little angry with these people for putting me through the test like that. So now can you hear? Yeah. So I went. I walked out to the hall, and they followed me out there, and I said, if you'd come to Santa Barbara, a visitor on my campus, I wouldn't put you to the test. I wouldn't put you in a room like that and ask you all those questions and see if you're, the litmus test. Then I said, tell me, what is this whole thing about? They actually thought I was a reporter who was coming in there to get some dirt on some of the people. And I was not at all trying to do that. I teach courses that I like to teach with accuracy. I like to be able to give accurate portrayals when I'm talking about other people's religions. And that's why I was there. And I told them that. And I think at that point they realized that I was who I said I was. So I said, tell me what this whole thing is about, this new right stuff. And the woman, who's Laura Walker, who was John Walker's daughter, who turned in John Walker when John Walker was a spy, remember that story? That's why they thought I was snooping. She said, I didn't even know that. I didn't know who John Walker was. She said, we're trying to take back the land. Trying to take back the land. I heard that phrase a couple of times this morning. What do you mean take back the land? The answer was, well, for all these years we've lived in this country, even though we've been around the edges of the periphery, the fringes. We always thought this was our land. This was our land too. She said, recently we don't feel that way anymore. The schools are not teaching the kind of things that we think ought to be taught. The media, it's all the same. Whatever network you listen to, it's all the same. Newspapers, on and on and on she went. So we have decided to take things into our own hands. and to create the alternative to the dominant way of life. Now, I had a chance, an hour and a half this morning, to do a workshop on this, and I went over this kind of thing with in much more detail. But I think that has a lot to do with the impulse that stands behind the rise of the new right. My own view on it, I mean, I can't. I'm so privileged to be given this opportunity that I have to summarize it so fast. But my own view is that impulse ought to be taken seriously. That is, I'm open to the impulse. I mean, I've felt that way myself a lot. That things are going too fast here now. I mean, we have to be careful that we're not racing ahead in our society. And that some of the values that have gotten us where we are not being left behind out of neglect. At the same time, there are some values that new right people don't take real cognizance of that I think are really vital to our society. I spent some time not so long ago in the we had a Humanities on the Hill program in Washington, D.C., and I was in the office of Congressman George Brown, and I was making a sort of pitch for support of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And Brown told me I was doing okay with it, but he said you can do a little better job if you think of it this way, that for as long as any of us can remember, we lived in a Cold War kind of situation, where any one day we could have been blown off the face of the earth by the enemy, and all those people on the other side, they woke up thinking they could be blown off the face of the earth by the enemy. And now there's been this sudden shift in that, and I'm very much aware of the fact that we're not out of difficulty at all. But he said, now maybe for the first time, this country has an opportunity to turn to quality of life issues, He thought that's why the health issue was number one. I was in Sweden not too long ago, where there is an institute that does work on what people actually believe, what motivates them, what is called ordinary life philosophies. And number one on the ordinary life philosophy list is health. Immortality gets down the list of ways, fourth or fifth. Environment probably number two. But Brown said, we need some help in figuring out how to make this transition. And then he said, you're in the field of religion. He said, tell me what you think the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means. Can you define the word happiness in that context? Life, can you define that word in that context? Well, I think that's a real challenge to the religious communities, to respond to that. I think that's a much more challenging objective than some of the things we have to wrangle over. In fact, from that point of view, I think some of the things we have to wrangle over are dodges, things that prevent us from getting to the real issue. I teach in big classes. I'm not big in terms of numbers at UCSB. I teach a couple of classes that have 900 people enrolled each quarter, which enables me to bring in some outstanding outside speakers. And in one of these classes called Voices of the Stranger, I had scheduled to have Jesse Jackson come in, and he was coming in, as it turned out, during the week of the Los Angeles, I won't call it a riot, but an uprising. So we had a chance to talk with him during that week. And on the morning following the uprising, when he said he wouldn't be able to come, I said, Reverend Jackson, how do you keep hope alive? He's always going, keep hope alive, keep hope alive. How do you keep hope alive today? He said, brother, on a day like today, it's hard for me to talk about hope. He said he'd been up all night. Well, we're still trying to schedule the time. So a couple of days later, I got a chance to talk to him again. Can we talk about hope? He said, sometimes all you have is hope, he said. Yeah, I'm thinking now it's warming up a little bit. And then the third talk. What about hope? He said, hope begets hope. Hope begets hope. Then, when I finally got a chance to talk with him, we talked about this hope sequence. And he said that where hope was reborn for him was when he saw a boy in the burn center in the Los Angeles hospital who tried to smile. So, as painful as that was through the burned face, he smiled at him and he said, hope was reborn through that boy's face. Now, it may seem to you like I'm veering away from the theme here, but I think that's what religion is about. And I think, see, we hear all kinds of things about, lots of Bible verses that are quoted, like John 3:16. I want to quote then John 3:17. John 3:16 talks about God so loved the world, but John 3:17 says that he didn't come to judge the world. Didn't come to judge the world. Came to bring love, life to the world. You can selectively pick out portions of the Bible to quote and to proof text, and there's some that are very, very difficult to interpret. Very, very difficult. In fact, I have a friend of mine who was going through a very hard time, and he decided, when all hope was lost, he would open the Bible and run his finger down the page, and whatever verse his finger, I don't know if any of you do that, but whatever verse his finger hit on, he would read that verse aloud, and that'd be it. Well, the verse that his finger hit on was a verse that said Esau was a hairy man. And one of his one of his problems was he was losing his hair. So he decided not to do that. If I were to move to Montana, do we have to declare ourselves? I'm not going to move here. I'd like to. On driver's license, do you have to say how tall you are and how much you weigh and color your hair? Do you have to do that here? Senator Simpson from Wyoming, when he gets to the color of the hair, he just writes down glossy. And for 5 years, I weighed about 190 pounds, and for 5 years, the typist who was typing away, they put down an extra zero, so it said 1,900 pounds on the driver's license. You go into a Safeway store to cash a check, and they see that 1,900 pounds, and wow. And I said, well, no, that was 3 or 4 months ago. Now, where are we with all this? Okay, since we have respondents who need to have something here to respond to, I want to tell one final story. Then I'll give way to them. But the story has to do with life. With I have come that you might have life and have life abundantly. We need to think. We need to think about what that means. As we said this morning in the session, that people who are always saying there's no salvation except through Christ, we can have that verse go, but let's think about what the salvation means. That is, if we know what salvation means, if it has some content to it, let's kind of share at that point rather than at the controversial part of that sentence. And this story comes out of the Vietnam War. After the Vietnam War, I had a chance. I never fought in Vietnam, but I've been teaching a course about the Vietnam War. And I had a chance to go to Vietnam with some educators. And we were in a conference there, and one of our American colleagues spoke to the group about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., and told about how many Americans had lost their lives and what the Americans were doing. 58,175 names on that wall in Washington, and even brought pictures and held up the pictures. And the Vietnamese people were very impressed and were very cordial about all of this. And yet, the man that I was sitting across from couldn't take it and got up and said he had to make a speech. Through tears, he said that he went to war when he was 18, and he came back when he was 43. He'd been at war for 25 full years. But that whole period of his life was war. When he came back from the war, he learned that his mother had been killed by American bullets. His father had been killed by American bullets. He said his sister, who was a 10-year-old girl when he went to war, after the war, when he came back, was a grown woman with children of her own. And then he said, 58,000 Americans, he said, that's 58,000 too many. And he thought that was deplorable, and he regretted it and apologized all over the place. Then he said, but the Vietnamese lost 2 million. 2 million lives were lost on the Vietnamese side. And he said, talk about MIAs, and he said 2,300, way, way, way too many. But he said 30,000 alone the Saigon area alone. And then he was gone. He had to leave the room. He was so enveloped in the emotion in telling us about this. Well, the next day we come back into the conference room and I pick out my Sony video camera, so I was going to take some pictures and take it back to my class. And on the table out falls a little Snicker bar. I've been carrying these Snicker bars, I didn't know what the food was going to be like when tell it the way it is. And had some Reese's and some Snicker bars. I'd like to be able to say I don't do that anymore, but actually that's not the truth, I still do that. And here, he spotted the Snicker bar. I said, you can have this across the table, you can have this. He said, I will take this to remember you by. And I said, no, but yeah, I've got another one here. You can eat this one. He said, no, I'll give this to my wife. Another one. He said, to my daughter. Another one. He said, I've got 2 daughters. So I finally gave him a whole handful of these things. He started to cry again. And he said, much better to exchange candy than bullets, and much better to meet across a conference table than across a battlefield. Well, then he was gone. And again, the tears, and he had to leave the room. The last day of the conference occurs, and I'm asked to speak on behalf of Americans to thank the Vietnamese for their hospitality. And I told them about a memorial out in north of Taos, New Mexico, where Vietnamese and American war dead pictures are placed side by side, and the point is to show that we were in this together. And I said that my hope is that in the future that this relationship between our countries, which has been a destructive relationship, will be a constructive one, and we can cooperate in the future. And again, I thought we were done, and he got up and he said, I know the story, I know the plot, I know the theme. He said, the story is about how very much our 2 civilizations lacked love for one another. Now, I've been studying religion 29 years, and I think the longer I study it, the more I know I don't know about it. But I do know one thing, that there's not a religious teacher that amounts to anything at all who doesn't counsel love one another. Love one another. And when anything is done in the name of religion that violates that command, I know that it doesn't have the support of the religious traditions deep down. And I think you can say that, regardless of the position from which you come. And it doesn't mean that people cannot have firm belief, have their own creeds, firm belief. But I know that love is at the basis of it, and I would also say that deep down, all of the religious traditions honor diversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Capps. I too tell people that I came from Oregon, even though I lived 25 years in California before coming back. I was intrigued by the title given this section of the conference, Reclaiming the Word Christian. In light of decades of the conflict in Ireland between Catholics and Protestants, and what's going on in what was formerly Yugoslavia, and what's being done many times in the United States of America in the name of Christianity, you might ask the question, why be interested in reclaiming the name? Maybe we'd better be off to getting a new name. And yet, in the best definition of the word, believing in and following the religion of Jesus Christ, perhaps that is the greatest need in the world today. I often wonder if Christ did come back and checked us out, if he would recognize much of what's done in his name and attributed to his religion. I would certainly come down on the way Dr. Capps concluded his statement, how the greatest of all is love. And that's a pretty big and tough word that most of us don't know much about. I think it was Professor Tillich, the great American theologian, who said in one of his later writings, you've noticed I've never tried to define love. By what would you measure it? And if I find myself glibly trying to say what love is, I say, wait a minute, back up. you're way off base. You've got a lot of learning to do before you even try to define it. However, those of us who do claim the name Christian because of our belief in and our dedication to Jesus Christ would say it is Christ-likeness, and there's enough there to work on for several lifetimes. I think there are some things that we need to avoid doing. I think we need to avoid closing our minds to the history of what's happening in the so-called struggle between the right and the left in the United States today as far as the religious realm is concerned. I think we should realize that perhaps the right in religion is attempting to do in some respects what for generations the more liberal part of the Christian church in the United States did. For many, many years it was the liberal leaders and the people with the PhDs and the graduates from the finer universities and so on that were entertained in halls of state and generally were quoted by the press. That has changed, and now we find another part of Christian America taking that place, and of course we saw that given great impetus during the Reagan years. But maybe they're doing the same thing that others did for a long, long time. One nice thing about living quite a while is you can kind of see how things that go around come around, how things change. I remember the Pentecostal churches meeting in little storefronts down by the railroad tracks, and generally on the wrong side of the railroad tracks. My parents took me to a little Pentecostal church out in Oregon, and next to the storefront where the Pentecostal church was the local house of ill fame, prostitution. And some of the people had a real awakening experience when, under the influence of it, they stumbled in the wrong door. But now the Assemblies of God are a large and a strong denomination. They're well organized. Much of their leadership is well trained, and it's a whole different ballgame. They've come a long ways and have churches of 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10,000 members, bulging at the seams. And some good things happen there in those churches. You wouldn't know if you didn't look into it and try to understand where the other person is coming from or what kind of shoes they're walking in. I wonder sometimes if our Lord might not say a plague on both of your houses when we find ourselves at sword points with each other. I think that both groups try to spend too much time in trying to package the ineffable. I was doing some graduate work at the University of Kansas a number of years ago, and my thesis was on the religious influence of Dewey. Of course, he's the great apostle of relativism. I had to do a lot of thinking about that as far as my own faith was concerned. It flashed on me one day, wait a minute, these are all words. And the relativists are pushing words as hard as the other side is, and both making the same mistake. So that helped me to kind of get back in touch with my own feelings. I think that it's good for us to recognize that the structure of the religious right is probably no more monolithic than the structure of communism was, although in the United States we tried to believe for many years that it was a monolithic structure and that all the communist nations of the world were holding together. It's no more monolithic than socialism is. There's all different kinds of socialism. It's no more monolithic than capitalism is. And I think it's good to remember that. We begin to think, oh, there's one great mass there, and first thing you know, we're subscribing to the conspiracy theory as much as they are on the other side. Fear does strange things to people. I think that it's good to realize that there are such organizations going in the so-called evangelical churches as Evangelicals for Social Action, which is a on-the-edge, cutting, group that's trying to say something to their own churches. And as far as matters of justice and peace are concerned, many times they're way out farther in advance than many of the liberal churches are, who are struggling to maintain their existence. I think it'd be good for people to recognize that there are such groups as the Sojourners, this group that lives together in Washington, D.C., and publishes this magazine, which is way out as far as justice and issues of peace are concerned, and they're wrestling with many of these problems. I think that we should realize that within every major denomination, there are groups that are wrestling with these problems, and we can't be monolithic in our thinking about either the religious right or the religious left. Neither of those terms fit very well. I think that we need to avoid catching each other's religious sicknesses. It's just as sickening to get sickness from the left as it is from the right, and vice versa. And when we start writing each other off, we're moving away from the possibility of unity, of diversity, and moving towards alienation, which of course has nothing to do with Christianity as I understand it. I hope that we don't have to feel that we have to put others down in order to lift ourselves up. That's not a very good commentary on anyone's Christianity. I was the director of human rights back during the 60s, the first director of human rights for the city of Tacoma, Washington, after being involved deeply in civil rights and other issues in the San Francisco area for quite a few years. And we were having some real problems. We had shootings out on the rivers between fishermen and Native Americans. We had 15% of the population of Tacoma who were African Americans. Many of them had been master sergeants and so on, and had settled there after they got out of service after serving at Fort Lewis. And they were absolutely ignored. We had one riot in which a police officer was shot and nearly killed. We had a very strong right-wing segment. I think 44% of the people voted for George Wallace the first time that he ran in Pierce County. It was a rather unhappy situation. And we did something that helped us a great deal. We got in touch with John Gardner, who at that time was getting his urban coalition concept developed, and it was put into action very well in Detroit, Michigan, in the aftermath of Detroit catching on fire. I think they called the program there New Detroit. The whole philosophy of the movement was simply this: you get all of the different sectors of a community in one room and keep them there. You may have to call out the National Guard to do that, but keep them there until they know who each other is, until they can name the problems that the community has, and then name the resources that each of them have that might be brought to bear upon the solution of the problem, and then go to work solving. Never forget the first meeting we had in Tacoma. The head of the labor union was Pete Peterson at that time. I think he weighed about 300 pounds. And I stood in the doorway and physically stopped him from leaving. He said, "I'm not going to take this crap," and so on and so forth. We had to stop black leaders from leaving. We had to stop downtown merchant leaders from leaving. We had to stop the school superintendent from leaving. Each one had his own turf and was there to defend it. But finally, they began to hear each other. And finally, began to find out that each other was human. And finally, began to recognize that they had some goals in common. And finally, that each of them had to bring resources to help solve those problems, or they would continue to be part of the problem instead of part of the problem solution. And then some wonderful things happened in Tacoma. I think that that's a pretty good model for Christians in the United States to pick up. if we tried it, it might work.
I don't have an apology or a disclaimer. I'm not, and have never been, from California. And I'm also interested and delighted that here at our very serious and very important conference, that it's the religious people who seem to be providing the levity and the humor. Just think about that and take that with you when we all seem too grim to you, or when things get too grim to you, and think about that as a marvelous and wonderful paradox of life, not always being as we expect it to be. In Lutheran circles, in which I rotate often, people introduce themselves and bring their credibility to the podium or to the microphone by announcing that they are from the Dakotas or from Minnesota. And it's interesting here that we bring our credibility by announcing that we're not from California. I guess we all need something to laugh at, and we all need someone maybe to exclude from the realm of who's human or who's okay. And I thank the Californians for being so gracious as to allow themselves to be the butt of our somewhat narrow-minded joking, and call all of us to remember, as we talk about inclusiveness and celebrating diversity, that if we're really celebrating diversity, we celebrate diversity, and that includes California. And that includes the religious right, who may hate us, but who are part of the diversity of this world in which we live. And some of us may spend a lot of our times being in tension with some folks who represent the kind of diversity really in our heart of hearts we wish we could stamp out or ignore. But I am convinced that even through the extreme pain that oppression brings, that we are in some ways enriched by our encounter with the most problematic forms of diversity. Sure, diversity as in different kinds of different colors and lovely exotic things. That's a fun kind of diversity. But the kind of diversity that really challenges us, we who proclaim that diversity is a good thing, whether it's from our political convictions or from our religious convictions. Our challenge is to take that really seriously, even to those who think we are doing the work of the devil. And that's scary. As I contemplated a mainline response to reclaiming the word Christian, I thought about a couple of issues. And the first issue that I thought about was the ongoing issue of the relationship of church and culture. And I'll be talking mainly about in our United States society, not speaking for the whole world. This morning in his workshop, Professor Capps mentioned a book by Stephen Carter, The Culture of Disbelief. It's a book that Bill Clinton has recently told folks was a wonderful book, and several of us have read that book. And in his book, Stephen Carter talks about how, although most of America believes in God and thinks of itself as religious in some way or another, in some sort of minimalist way, in fact, as a society, we consider religion to be an extremely private thing, and we'd rather people talk about sex publicly than religion publicly. Keep it to yourself. One of the quotes that Stephen Carter gives is, "Pray if you like, worship if you must, but whatever you do, do not on any account take your religion seriously." Or at least, and I would add, or at least let anyone know that that's what you're doing, that that's why you're doing what you're doing. He talks about the privatization of religion and how that causes some problems in our society. especially as the new right is bringing its religion out into the public, and the rest of us are left mumbling privately and not understanding that the show has changed. Well, this privatized nature of religion is very different from the origins of Christianity. Jesus Christ was not a private, keep-it-to-yourself sort of person. What he did and how he lived was, for that day, I mean, he didn't have television, but was very public. Very public. And he paid for it with his life. The early church lived in the underground, fighting with everyone, fighting within itself, fighting with the Jewish sisters and brothers, fighting with the Roman sisters and brothers. And when Constantine, in his deathbed conversion, made Christianity the official religion of the empire, for some there was a sigh of relief. Whew, finally we're safe. And for others there was a cry of fear. We've sold out. And since Constantine, we have lived, and I will say as Christians, we have lived in that tension between the sigh of relief that we're safe, we're part of the establishment, and that, whoops, we've sold out. We've lived in that tension. Mainline Christians, who are supposed to be responding here, have for the last 40 years and probably longer in America lived in a cozy relationship with the status quo. We are now seeing in the Christian right a challenge to that cozy relationship to the status quo. I think that cozy relationship to the status quo can be defined by what I would call coffee pot, a friendliness at the coffee pot approach to Christianity. What does your faith mean to you? Well, it means I'm nice to other people and I don't take coffee from the office coffee machine without paying for it. Kind of a coziness with the status quo. And the fundamentalists, the Christian right, is challenging that and saying, no, we are not part of the status quo. And we've heard this morning some of the Christian right agenda in suggesting what is not part of the status quo and what they believe. And I guess I don't want to refute that point by point, but what I want to say is, how does that challenge those of us who are in the mainline churches? How does that challenge us in our relationship with the status quo in our society? And have we sold out? I got a phone call about a month or so ago from someone writing in one of our national Lutheran magazines who had just heard about a case in Minnesota, I believe it was. It was a case involving a Christian scientist and the death of a child, and one parent was suing the other parent because the parent who was a Christian scientist had refused treatment for this child who was diabetic, and that was the direct cause of the child's death. Anyway, the question I got from this reporter was, do you see any impact in this for our church or for the mainline churches? And I had to stop and think and think and think. And it seemed to me, and the way I responded was that we are so enmeshed in the status quo in our mainline churches that practically nothing we do challenges the status quo. Practically nothing we do brings us in conflict with the law. And maybe that means we're really good, model, docile citizens. Or maybe that means we are not, in fact, taking our countercultural roots, our revolutionary roots of following Jesus seriously enough. And the only instance I could think of, and maybe some people will think of some more later, the only instance I could think of in which my church's positions might bring us in conflict with the law real clearly would be in dealing with illegal immigrants and following the mandate to feed the hungry and clothe the naked and bring them into and take care of them, regardless of whether they are political or economic refugees. That made me stop and think a lot about how much our traditions, our mainline traditions, and mine in particular, is still, for all our social statements, we're still pretty cozy with the status quo. The second issue that I wanted to address just for a little bit is the issue of reclaiming the word Christian. My first response to that is, oh, I didn't know that we'd given it up. But by the fact that this has to be addressed, it means that yes, on some level, we have given it up, or else it's been taken away from us, and we just didn't notice. I think we've got a bit of a public identity crisis. I think that the Christian right and those who have name everything Christian, from the Jesus is Lord, use tires in that book, The Bean Trees, those who put the name, who use Christian as an adjective for everything, to say this is mine and this is good and everything else is bad in an exclusive sort of way, I think they use the word so publicly, and as a nation we are so shallow that we let them get away with it. And so when someone proclaims loudly and obnoxiously that this is the Christian position on X, Y, or Z, we dutifully report it in our newspapers and in our television. And unless the mainline traditional Christian denominations are there saying, no, this is Christian, this is our way of being Christian, we let it go. Case in point, the Creationist Conference that was here a couple of weeks ago, 2,000 people heard that Genesis meant that God literally created the world in 7 days, and that homosexuality is a sin condemned in Genesis, and that ordained women are a sin condemned in Genesis, and that women are to be subservient to men. And the mainline churches were not reported in the paper as giving a counter opinion to this. Now, we do have a conference next week, and if you're interested in that, I can tell you a little bit about that on my own time, or on your own time. My point is that we let it go, and we don't recognize the seriousness of letting go that term. When I, a month or so ago, got the brochure in the mail about this conference, I happened to look through it, actually read it, and noticed, somewhat to my surprise, that I was listed as a tentative respondent. Now, what that meant was that I wasn't available for phone confirmation when the printer needed the brochure, and I understand that. But I thought about that, and as you'll note in the more recent brochure, I'm no longer listed as a tentative respondent. In some ways, I like claiming that title for myself as tentative respondent. Because by saying I am a tentative respondent, I'm saying I don't know all the answers, I don't claim to know all the answers, I don't claim to speak for God, I don't claim to speak exclusively for my tradition, I don't claim that I am never wrong. I don't claim that there are no choices. By being a tentative respondent, I claim that we have choices, and that we have wills, and that we have minds, and that we have traditions, and that we have moral mandates, and that we respond. And in my case, I respond with humility and prayer, that I come to a conference like this not simply because I think it's the politically appropriate thing to do, because for me it is an act of faith to be here, to listen, to respond, and to attempt to share. By being a tentative respondent, I claim that we live in paradox, not paradise, but paradox. And that we work together to overcome our shortcomings, that we celebrate our humanity from our different perspectives and for our different motivations, and that we ask each other forgiveness when we come to too hasty decisions, when we act out of our narrowness, and that we learn to love and that we learn to laugh. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you. That was wonderful. I think that we have some good time here to be in dialogue with you all, and I know that you all are sitting out here with ideas and thoughts and questions and comments teeming through your heads. So I would like to open it up to people, and what I would ask is that I guess I would repeat the question, and you may direct it to any of our respondents, or if it's not a question, I will try and repeat your thought. So, and ask if anyone would care to respond to it. So, Max?
Curious at all, as I believe that a lot of discussion on Christian rights, whenever I turn on Pat Robertson, all I hear is the Old Testament. Like you mentioned, the Genesis book, discipline, all this stuff. And my understanding of the Christian tradition is that Christ came, he actually expressed on this quote and saying, I came to overturn the law of the Old Testament. And yet that's never thrown back to the Christian right. I'm just wondering what you would say about that.
Could everybody hear Max's question? He pointed out that in listening to Pat Robertson and similar programs, that seems to be a real predominance of Old Testament texts referred to, and that he was asking the panelists whether or not there is a response in terms of the new law referred to in Christ. And I guess I would ask one of you.
I'd like to work with the first part of that question rather than more than with the last part. Yeah, I think what happens with Robertson and with New Christian Right religion is that there is a kind of equation between America as one entity, chosen nation, Israel, and that's easier to do out of the Hebrew Bible than out of the New Testament. And I think that's why I was struck by that. I spent years, not years, I spent some weekends over a number of years going to some of these places, and it always struck me that when I listened to Jerry Falwell preach, and you could hear him on television a lot back in those days, I don't listen to it anymore, but he would, sermons have a certain form, and that is the sermon will usually try to convict, the preacher will try to convict people of sin during the first part, and then talk in order to prepare the altar call to provide the invitation to the means of grace, and at least before the sermon is over. The cataloging of sins that comes in the first part of the sermon, the cataloging of sins have to do with national sins, with how America, that was the big shift. If you compare, their sermons to other sermons, the big change is that America's fallen apart. I mean, that there are these American social ills. So I think that it has to do with taking the Hebrew Bible, taking the concept of the chosen nation, applying that to to America, not to the United States, but to America, and saying that the same promises that apply to Israel also apply to this country, and that's easier to do out of Old Testament or Hebrew Bible than out of New.
The response I wanted to make to that is that there's a danger in saying Christ overthrew the law. There's a danger of anti-Judaism coming out in that and saying that Christianity is better. I'm not saying that you said that, but that kind of approach is real dangerous. The law is very much a part of Christian tradition, and Christ came as a fulfillment of the law and as a way of opening up, not just to the chosen people, the Jews, but opening up God's grace as we understand it to even folks like all of us. And so that'd be my concern about what you said too.
Yes.
America has a history of being struck by religious revivals on a pretty regular basis. And this time, though, it seems like what's different is that the religious revival is tied into political means, political power. What is different about this time in terms of theology? And what's different about this particular?
I trust you could hear the question. So, good.
Well, again, I think we have to avoid looking at this in a monolithic way. I believe that there is always spiritual revival. Sometimes it's at a higher tide than others. If there wasn't, Christianity would have died out long ago. But the point is that this revival may be used by some in a political way. Sometimes leaders, whether they be in religion or in the Democratic or the Republican Party or some other party, are inclined to find out how can I use this, how can I use this, how can I use this, and they use it. But there are a lot of people who are getting sick and tired of what's happening. It dawned on me the other day that this year there will be more young people killed by handguns in the United States or other types of guns than by automobile accidents. And that's a horrifying thing to realize. And a lot of people are saying we must have a spiritual renewal or our country's going down the chute. So I think you've got those that would use this for political ends, and you have others that because of the times are turning to God or turning to spirituality, and so we must not look at this in a monolithic way.
Any other thoughts before we give you your room assignments for the next round? Yes, Dave.
I come from a wonderful little country church where we used to hear a lot about the word rebirth. If somebody was raised in a family that mistreated them, and they lived wrong life patterns, they wanted to come to us, we'd be their new family and love them and heal them and be inside. Our church is a hospital. But the religious right came in this year, and everybody's turned political. And if people come to church hurting or suffering or struggling, they're liable. I can guarantee they'll hear a conversation identifying all the evil people in society and categorical groups that are destroying their country and how we're going to take action against these people. And, you know, I hate to see the church turn political when it's supposed to be a hospital. Jesus absolutely refused every chance to take political power, to take military power. He fought the Pharisees who did not become zealots. And I think we're supposed to follow his example, become a hospital, and to give people a new kingdom within, because the religious right wants to stop the immorality of the world. But if we try to do it politically, there is no hospital anymore. You have to be healed inside before you can act different. And we have stopped doing that. We have stopped following Jesus. And I think people in the religious right have absolutely no right to point the finger to God. I think that we're becoming everything worse than we say other people are. You don't have to comment on that if you don't want to.
Actually, I think we have some comments.
You know, I appreciate what you said. I'd really like to comment on it. I'd tell a story here quickly, but I had a student who came to an office hour one time, and the knock on the door wasn't a very strong knock, and I wasn't even sure there was anybody out in the hall there. But I opened the door, and there he was, and he said that he had never been to a faculty office hour before and didn't know quite how to behave. And I said, you know, it's kind of easy. I mean, you kind of sit there, and I sit here, and we think about whether there's something we want to talk about together. And he said, well, after he sort of warmed into this, he said it's like this. Every Monday morning at 9 o'clock, I take my psychology class. And in the psychology class, each Monday morning we get a new malady, new neurosis, psychosis. There are 10 weeks in the quarter. First week is introduction to the course. 10th week is the summary, and then we get in the middle there are 8 of these. And he said each one of those is applicable to him. I mean, he's schizoid, he's paranoid, and he kind of wonders on Sunday night, what that class is going to be about, and then what he's going to learn about himself in that morning. Then he said he goes from there to a philosophy class, 10 o'clock, where they're studying existentialism, and there they're doing fear and dread. He cataloged off these words, angst, despair. I said, have you heard Anfechtung? I learned that one. That's heavy, deep-seated melancholy, so deep, worse than sloth. I mean, you just sit there and can't do a thing. He asked me how to spell that, and I wrote that down. And then he says he goes from there to a class on Western intellectual history where they're reading Nietzsche and nihilism, God is dead. And he said he hadn't even had breakfast yet. I mean, this is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Well, and so we're sitting there kind of facing each other, and I'm thinking, why is he telling me this? And I just wait. And he said, tell me, do you guys, quoting him now, do you guys have any courses on happiness? And I said, I don't know. I don't know if we do. So we looked in the index to the UCSB catalog under happiness. Couldn't find anything under happiness. And then I did sort of a quick check of descriptions of catalog descriptions of college courses. And the word that appears there most often is the word problem. The word problem. And I think, I think that this fellow didn't know he had those problems till he took the course. But the reason I tell that story is that it seems to me that if we have to categorize this, mainline people ought to be saying more today. I mean, if we have some truths that we believe in, or if anybody has any good human truth, that we really know about, let's get it out there somewhere. I mean, if we know what the abundant life is, or if we have some ideas of what the well-lived life would be, or any of these things, let's get them out there. And what I'm suggesting is that this whole thing about simply questioning authority, that's sort of first stage kind of thing, question authority. Or, I used to say this all the time, I can't do it anymore. I'd say to people, when they come into the class, I may not give you any answers here, we may not get any answers, at least we're going to find the right questions. Well, I think that's a sellout, actually. I think we ought to spend as much time thinking about what we can affirm as simply engaging in the whole realm of critique. And we're very, very good at critique. But I think we've created a way of life that sort of leads by critique. And I think I've learned from the monks, studied the monks a long time, never became one because I'm already married and I've got 3 kids and a couple of cars. But the monks, the monks will teach you that the disposition that you bring to life gives formation to the life that you live. And if you bring critique, if you approach reality through critique, you're going to live in the world that critique creates. You're going to be thinking about problems all the time. I wish we could turn it the other way, because I actually think that we're all of us in this together, and that whatever truth is true for anyone is true for everyone, and we don't have too many of those. I mean, if anybody has discovered some of those, let's share those, and I think the human race will be better for it. Thanks.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you all for being a wonderful audience. We really appreciate it.
Okay, before I get to the next 2 series of workshops, I want to tell you what's going on tonight. There'll be a break about 6 o'clock, things will be done, and then there's a dance starting at 8 o'clock. And the name of the band is the Elk Park Cha-Cha Society, and they do salsa music, which is a Latin American dance music. And this dance is for everybody. Please come. If you have a red dot on your cards, you've already paid to get into the dance. Otherwise, put your $5 down at the door. Now, the members of the band assure me that you can 2-step to salsa music. You can also 4-step and 8-step, but no 12-stepping.